Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your Soviet Union, and in this one there are numerous developments across the front line in favor of both the Russians and the Ukrainians. Russians have one big advance to the southeast of Koshantka, while the Ukrainians have one big advance to the northeast of Pokrovsk. The Russians have numerous smaller advances in the eastern outskirts of the Dnipropetrovsk region along the second line of defense in the Zaporizhzhia region, as well as some smaller advances along the Severk forest area and to the south of Siversk, with additional advances to the northwest of Leman. The Ukrainians are attempting to counterattack north of Leman in the direction of Consolidation and are attempting to regain positions in the direction of Severk. The Russians also made a small advance to the northeast of Pokrovsk. Starting out in the southern section of the front line, the Russians have managed to gain control over the town of Novomykolaivka here along the second line of defense. The Russians are gaining control over one position after another to the south of these defensive lines, while shelling the Ukrainian positions within the fortifications and flanking them from the rear. The Russians are here taking advantage of the Ukrainian positions, which are now being turned and focused in the northern direction, leaving gaps in the southern direction. However, the anti-tank ditches and dragon teams prevent a Russian assault from the south, meaning the Ukrainians can focus on the northern flank, while the Russians are establishing positions in the south. The Russians are here slowly building up the positions in the southern flank to gain control of the road leading through the second line of defense to have steady supplies going forward as they continue offensive operations through these fortifications, while at the same time storming the positions in the northern direction to control their forces and connect them between the northern and southern section of the front line with the road that connects from Beresilva in the north down to Novomykolaivka in the south. This means the Russians have three objectives. The first one is to push through the fortifications to gain control over the road, connecting the Russian positions in Sosnivka in the north down to Novomykolaivka in the south, while at the same time gaining control over Novomykolaivka, allowing them to have a connecting spot in the south, which also continues westwards in the direction of Kalinivska and Verbove, to the south of these fortifications. And the third objective is to gain control over the settlements, Ternova, Beresova, and Stepove, as well as the fortified positions surrounding them, to have control over not just the supply roads connecting each other, but also the settlements where forces can be built up for further offensive operations going further westwards. The road to the north goes through the southern bank of the Volga River line, which is close to Ukrainian positions in larger towns such as Novomykolaivka in the direction of Orestopil. This is why the Russians are focusing on the southern direction, where they can gain control over the second line of defense and still have supply lines going westward. Moving up to the Pokrovsk section of the front line, the Russians made a small advance here west of Shahove, where they're looking to solidify their positions in the northern direction, in the direction of Kocherev Yar. The Russians are here slowly developing their offensive operations to secure the flanks, while the Ukrainians continuously attempt to counterattack, not just along the river line from the south and the north, but also from the western flank through Novomykolaivka to push towards Mayak and Epolkivka. This will cut the positions of the Russians into multiple parts. The Ukrainians are here looking to solidify their control over the western bank of the river line and are attempting any angle possible to attack the Russian positions wherever weaknesses appear. And the Russians do not have solid defensive positions here in the northern direction, due to the fact that they are lacking in supply lines leading to the front line. I previously said, how did the Russians manage to gain control over such a vast area despite the limited supplies and supply lines available in the area? The answer is because the Ukrainian fortifications and defenses were simply too weak and undermanned to properly defend against even poorly supplied and low in number Russian forces storming their positions. Now, with the Ukrainian reinforcements arriving, the Ukrainians are able to counterattack and regain positions in some of these weak points the Russians have across the front line, covering such a wide area with a few number of soldiers. The Ukrainians are not just looking to encircle the Russian forces on the western bank of the river line, they are also looking to drain the Russian resources as they continue these counterattacks. This will allow them to collapse the Russian lines. The Russian test here is whether they'll be able to supply a larger force and transport this larger force to the front line to stabilize the situation and hold out until the Ukrainians run out of gas, while treating Ukrainian forces along the front line to lower their combat capabilities. The Ukrainians are here widening their section of the front line on the western bank of the river line here near Rusinya and Poltavka. The objective is to secure the flank of Sofiivka and Toretsk to prevent a Russian pincer maneuver from the south of Kocherev Yar in the direction of Toretsk and from the eastern flank in the direction of Sofiivka. They have now secured the eastern flank and they continue positional fighting on the western flank within the vicinity of Shahove and Toretsk, while also storming directly from the north in the direction of Kocherev Yar. In the Koshantka direction, the Russians managed to gain control over the fortified positions and the area in between Stubushki, Predyshine, and Bilahora and Dilivka to the south. The Russians now have full control over the connection between Toretsk in the south and Chasiv Yar in the north. Although the Russians already had the ability to transfer their forces and supplies to connect the forces between Chasiv Yar and Toretsk through the highway to the east of Toretsk along the eastern bank of the canal through Bakhmut and up to Chasiv Yar. This is a much wider route and more difficult route. They also have to cross over the canal twice, and they also have to cover a lot more distance. This makes them more vulnerable to Ukrainian fire. Instead, the connection now between the western bank of the canal allows Russians to transfer much faster, not to mention infantry can simply walk between the northern and southern directions. If the northern flank has more supplies and the southern flank has less supplies, or the reverse, these forces can easily be redirected to the other section and they can support each other. The Russians can also concentrate their forces in one direction, push through the Ukrainian defenses, and relocate quickly. This gives the Russians a lot more maneuverability and flexibility with the offensive operations towards Koshantka. Better coordination between the northern and southern forces as well. The Russian capture of this portion was geolocated with this footage here, where the Russians were detected to be driving through the road between Oleksandro-Shultine in the south with Predyshine in the north. The Russians, while driving here, were struck by Ukrainian drones, from which they moved to gain control over the fortifications, moving through the defensive lines and capturing them from the western flank, which is from the rear of any Ukrainian forces present in these areas. They managed to gain control over the large fortification and the small fortification here while driving through the roads, which signals full capture of these positions. If the Ukrainians still have forces here, they are encircled. If they do not have any forces left, the Russians have full control over the area. Moving on to the Siversk section of the front line, the Russians continue to develop the offensive operations to the south of Siversk. The Russians are here storming the fortified positions of the Ukrainians southwest of Novomykolaivka and northwest of Ivano-Darivka on the vicinity of the fortified position of the Ukrainians overlooking the southern railways. The Russians gain control over this fortified position will allow them to advance to capture VMK, advance through the railway area and fight over the fortifications just south of Siversk, as well as push through towards Svenivka here to the southwest of Siversk, but there will still be the final fortifications before they're able to storm Siversk itself. Just north of this, the Ukrainians continue their counterattacks in the direction of Severk itself, gaining control over the westernmost road. The Ukrainians here are stabilizing their positions west of Severk, following the Russian counterattacks further south in the direction of Siversk itself. A lot of positional fighting is taking place on the northern flank of Siversk, while the Russians continue offensive operations to improve their positions south of Siversk, creating a pincer on the town itself. The Russians also continue their advances within the Severskyi first area, where they've managed to gain control over additional parts of it, pushing the Ukrainians down to the southern outskirts along the Seversk-Donetsk river line. The Ukrainians now have a tiny position within the Severskyi first area east of the Sherbets river line, remaining under their control. These positions are important for the Russian forces to develop offensive operations in the direction of Siversk itself, but also in the direction of Leman as a main logistical hub for the Ukrainian forces, which could switch in favor of the Russians both for the Siversk and Slovyansk section of the front line. In the direction of Leman, the Russians continue their offensive operations to the northwest of the town as they are looking to approach Stavki and cut off the supply route between Dobryshev and Stavki, while they've already cut off the supply line between Stavki and Sarishne. This is not just to isolate Ukrainian positions, but also to connect their own positions. The Ukrainians in turn are attempting to re-enter Konsolidation and counterattack in that direction to cut off the supply lines of the Russians operating southwest of Myrne. The Ukrainians still have strong positions within Myrne itself. The Russians are here looking to gain control over the road between Severk, Stavki and Dobryshev, and also to gain control over these settlements themselves and Myrne to secure their positions along the Sherebestrova line and on the northern and northwestern flanks of Leman, and to cut off the supply lines leading into Leman from the northwestern direction. The Russians also making use of a new tactic on the supply lines leading into the Donetsk region, and as we can see in this image here, 3 Russian drones are on a road. All of them are armed with some firepower. What the Russian tactic is that they're sending drones even when Ukrainian supply trucks are not detected, waiting for the Ukrainians to arrive and acting as mines. And not just regular mines, but movable mines. The Russians would be able to fly after the vehicle if they miss the vehicle. What we're seeing is that the Russians are making use of something that is superior to a mine behind the Ukrainian lines. Although they have a significant weakness towards armored vehicles with firepower, as the Ukrainian forces, if they see them, would be able to just shoot at them and destroy these drones as they are immovable targets. However, regular supply trucks will have a difficulty seeing them and will also not have any firepower to deal with them. They would either have to stop and turn around or be struck by these drones, and if they stop to turn around, if the Russians also see them, then they'll be able to fly behind them and chase them. But this is an interesting tactic. We'll see more of it if it works, we'll see less of it if it doesn't. Now, the Zapad 2025 exercises will be starting tomorrow. Zapad 2021 was the last Zapad exercise, and during that exercise, the Russians sent a lot of equipment to Belarus and Western Russia, which they then used for the subsequent invasion of Ukraine. They could repeat a similar use through this exercise to travel with a lot of equipment to the front and then make use of it for offensive operations. Therefore, it is an interesting event to have close eyes over. Although Russia is claiming only approximately 15,000 soldiers to 30,000 soldiers will be involved in these exercises, some estimates range from 50 to 200,000 as well. It is completely unclear whether they are speaking the truth or not. We'll have to see during these exercises as well. So in the coming days, we'll see some interesting developments, or it'll be another nothing burger. That is going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.